Okay.
Walks in.
Well, I'm just going to go ahead and we'll just go ahead and get started. Oh, I kind of bored. Hello, hello. Hello, everybody. Well, quite the weather events going on. I know that people are having trouble getting here. Some people have switched to live stream. And I myself had quite a time getting here from Provincetown. We are waiting for Tom Perrotta, but Laurie has a special guest who she'll introduce at the moment. So we're very excited that he is here and sorry that he's having to be involved enough as a participant and not being able to sit back and enjoy it, but we're grateful to you. What's going on. Laurie, you might recall people watching, we had a great event with Laurie in Provincetown.
Right.
We've sold out several times, the book several times since that event, and which is really great. So I'm Jeff, the owner of East End Books, Boston Seaport, and East End Books P-Town. We're a Provincetown-based bookstore, and this store is about a year old at this point, so we're excited to be in the Seaport. Our website, both stores share the same website, eastendbooksptown.com, so all the events are on there. The next event at any of our stores is Saturday. We have a special event on Saturday there. 3 wonderful poets with Semiotext and Feminist Press that will be there at 5 p.m. And then the next event here is next month. We've got both, let's see, we've got David Hicks, and we've got also Dawn Land, Tess Callahan that will be in conversation. They both have just got movie deals, and Laurie will tell us about her movie deal. And then I wanted to mention a special event that will be in Boston on Sunday, December 7th, and we have cards here. It's on our website under December 7th. I'm co-chairing an event with the author and actress Christy Cashman at the Quinn. Sunday, December 7th, to benefit the Theater Offensive, and they've been around 35 years in Boston. I'm chairing their capital campaign to build their new theater, which will be in the Fenway. And this event will be at the newest restaurant that Ken Falk has designed at the Quinn called Lunasol, which is like being kind of in San Paulo. It's very relaxed, wonderful. There'll be music, performances, food. So if you're able to come, you can go on the Theater Offensive website under events or under our website. Tickets are on Eventbrite, but it's a private link because it's a private club, so we can't put it out just to the public. So we hope you'll turn out for that special event. So, Laurie is an award-winning documentary filmmaker and journalist whose writing has appeared in the New Yorker, the New York Times, New York, the Daily Beast, Slate, and others. She's the 2021 winner of the Dan History Award for the Improbable Journey of Dorothy Parker's Ashes for the New Yorker, and gold medallion winner in the People Profiles category for the Silurian Press Club.
Yeah, it's the oldest.
The oldest 77th Annual Excellence in Journalism Awards. She's the author of The Stowaway, which I absolutely loved, and we had an event. When was that?
2019.
2019 in Provincetown, a bestseller and an Indie Next selection, which is kind of like the New York Times version for the indie bookstores. So that's a big deal that it was an indie news selection. She's an adjunct professor of journalism at NYU Arthur L Journalism Institute in the graduate program. Now he's not here and hopefully will show up, but Tom Perrotta is the author of 11 works of fiction, including Election and Little Children, both of which were made into Oscar-nominated films, and The Leftovers and Mrs. Fletcher, which were adapted into acclaimed HBO series. His new novel is Ghost Town, which will be out next year, and that's already been optioned as well. We have further details about this brilliant woman and Tom on our website in terms of their bios, and I think Laurie will have some information about some special events, programs she'll be appearing on as well. So without further ado, Laurie will introduce our special guest.
Is this on?
Yep.
Yeah, it's on, yeah.
Oh, great.
I will give you
Oh,
the mic
so
back.
I'm very, we don't know because of this weather if Tom Perrotta's coming, but we're in good hands in case he doesn't show up. We have with me Professor Eric Trickey.
Yeah, hi, I'm Eric Trickey. I'm also an adjunct professor. I teach journalism at Boston University. And one of the classes I teach there is called Rescuing Lost Stories, nonfiction narratives from the archives. And Laurie is a regular guest speaker in my class via Zoom. I know Laurie from various conferences, Power of Narrative Conference, Biographers International Conference. That's how we became friends. And I'm just stepping in here as a journalist who knows how to ask questions until Tom Perrotta shows up. So, Laurie, I know that you, like a lot of people, first got interested in Amelia Earhart as a child. But what made you decide that Amelia Earhart would be your next book?
Well, I think if anyone has read The Stowaway, you'll know that that book, which was narrative nonfiction, so it's a true story, was really mostly taking place in 1928, up until the Great Depression starts in the early 30s, and it's about a stowaway who jumped into the river and swam to Admiral Byrd's ship going to Antarctica. At that time, he was Commander Byrd. He had a publisher, a very eccentric publisher named George Palmer Putnam. And he was not the head of Putnam Books, which was the esteemed books that had a storied history in the 1800s. But he was the nephew, the flamboyant nephew, that really wanted to push this company into the 20th century. And he decided he wanted to be the publisher of adventurers. So he had Byrd. He also was a person who had Lindbergh. And in The Stowaway, there's a moment where Amelia Earhart, in August of 1928, is flying over the ship that has 3 stowaways, a Jewish stowaway, a Catholic stowaway, and a black stowaway, which was a big story point in 1928. And she's saying goodbye to the ship. They don't know, none of the stowaways have been discovered yet. I was trying to figure this out. What was Amelia Earhart doing on the scene? And I realized that she had gotten famous in June of 1928, and she also had a Putnam book. But then, as I'm looking further, I realized she's actually George Palmer Putnam's mistress. And I thought, that is not in my Scholastic book. And I just thought, that's interesting. And, she actually becomes famous not very far from where we are right now. Her story really takes off as far as anyone knowing who she is at Long Wharf in Boston, and we can go back to that. But she was basically someone that I couldn't figure out. I did not know. I'm actually, I hope this doesn't sound vain, but I'm one of the world experts on Amelia Earhart now, but 5 years ago, I knew nothing about Amelia Earhart. And that's a great place to begin as a journalist. To have wonder, to bring wonder. And I had a lot of questions that I wanted answered. I wanted to know if she was a good pilot, if this was all like smoke and mirrors. I wanted to know if this was a real marriage. I did not know her orientation or sexual preferences. I didn't know anything. I just thought, what can I find? And I mentioned this to my agent who loved it, and also remember I'm also an expert at this time from 1928 to 1932. And I'm also going to say something that I've been on tour since the book came out July 15th, and I started my tour in New York with Emily Nussbaum, and then I went to Kansas immediately. And in Kansas, Amelia Earhart is like, if you go to Atchison, Kansas, it's like going to Graceland. That's what the whole industry. They like to say this is a Midwest story. But to my mind, the more I researched it, it was a New York story. That this Amelia Earhart, the person that we came to know, was basically concocted in a Midtown Manhattan office. And Amelia Earhart was, in this essence, the first reality show winner. And who she becomes is very important, and her inspiration for millions of people is very important, and she's a very brave person. But the story, as far as I could tell, begins in April 1928 in New York City and quickly shifts to Boston.
So the book is The Aviator and the Showman. It's a dual biography, Amelia Earhart and George Putnam. Why did you decide to do that?
Well, to be honest, the story of Amelia Earhart that we know is often blanched. I was just doing an interview about this because a lot of biographers and journalists make the mistake of working with an estate. And that's great if you want access, but you're not going to get the real story. So there's two people controlling the narrative. There's the Putnam family, who doesn't want anything unseemly about Putnam out there. They're going to spin any sort of nastiness as sort of playful, prankster, right? And Amelia Earhart is actually quite a good person, as I found out. But, she's not a perfect person. And she's very, very ambitious. And she's always been portrayed as very, very modest and very brave. But what is wrong with a woman being ambitious? And even today in America, people like bravery in women, but they don't like bold ambition. And I wanted to show that this was a story of marriage and also a story of ambition. And Amelia Earhart, and this is going to break some hearts, is not the greatest pilot in the world. But she is very brave. She's not a bad pilot. You can't actually go across the Atlantic by yourself if you're a bad pilot. But she is not, she's always being promoted above her skill level. And the book was excerpted in the New Yorker, and one of the things they put out there, and I've stolen it because I think it's really good, is that the story of the Aviator and the Showman is the story of a tragedy foretold. And I just think that this is a much more interesting story. George Putnam is really colorful. Now, Eric, you know that in journalism in particular, not just in books, conflict is good. People want to know the messed up stuff, but people from the estate don't want you to know things. Like, for example, one of the things that I found, and we can talk about that, I was able to access new material that no one had looked at, but I realized that things like Amelia Earhart as a 21-year-old is trying to marry a 68-year-old millionaire to further her career, and that's just sort of written out of the narrative. Or that Amelia Earhart and George fake her license in 1929, promoting her as having the fourth woman to have a transport license, which is the hardest license to have, and she's not flying that well, and it's faked. And so these are interesting details that are going to get washed out when an estate is taking over the story. But I'm a journalist, and what I'm mostly interested in is the truth. And I don't think that takes away from the fact that Amelia Earhart is super brave. And one of the things that I discovered was that she's also a tremendous feminist. Tremendous feminist. And some of the women that are better flyers than her, frankly, and I could name names, but they're really trying to break records. Amelia Earhart, as far as I can make out, has two motivations. One is to further women, which is very different than making the record across. The other one is to promote aviation, which is gender-free. She is basically one of the most popular people in the 30s when the aviation industry falls out during the Great Depression. And Lindbergh, who we do not know yet as a secret Nazi, but he's still not that likable in the 30s. And Amelia Earhart is just incredibly likable. And she becomes, for all intents and purposes, the ambassador to the air. And one of the things she does is convinces women to go up in the air as passengers and take the women up. And if women will go up as passengers, they will let their husbands go up as passengers, they will let their children go up. And you can actually say that when you fly a plane today, it's in great part due to Amelia Earhart during the 1930s and her championing aviation is safe.
Who were the greatest pilots of her generation? Maybe you could pick a man and a woman, and how do they make it into your book?
Absolutely, the woman that was the best pilot during the 1920s was a woman who was actually a teenager named Eleanor Smith. And she was incredible. She started flying at 8. She lived in Freeport, Long Island. I have some family members here who have moved from Freeport, and they know that she was called the Flying Flapper of Freeport, which is really hard to say 3 times. But she wasn't really a flapper. She was someone who became first on American consciousness when she flew under the 4 bridges on the East River. She was a New Yorker. She also was rising in popularity when Amelia Earhart was now being managed by her lover, who was a married man. Putnam was married when he was with Amelia Earhart, and he was taking 10%, and it promoted her as the greatest American woman aviator. And here comes, and she's already in her 30s, and here comes this teenager. She's so good that the people in the aviation industry vote her the pilot of the year. And Trump, I call him Trump. Putnam is not dissimilar to Trump. He has an obsession with Eleanor Smith, and he is set in his 40s to destroy this teenager's career. And there's a tremendous track record of this, and when you actually go through the archives. One of the things that really startled me is that other biographers would dismiss her claims, which are very consistent, which fact check out that Amelia couldn't fly that well, that she faked her license, that Putnam was trying to destroy her career. This all like fact checks out. And other biographers said she's a liar. How could Amelia Earhart be a bad pilot or faked her license when she got it in 1929? But if you actually go to the records, you see the paperwork is that it's 1930, and that the paperwork was lost in the mail. And there's the people that didn't have Google back then. But now you have someone like a journalist, almost 90 years later, looking into paperwork, looking at, I literally, as many people know, this is a popular history book. So the best part about that is you get a pretty hefty advance, which allows you to go to places that someone who might be working in an academic institution might not be able to afford to go. I always say it's much to my husband's chagrin that I spend my advance, because he's like, that money should be going into the bank. I'm like, but I have to fly here and here and here. I actually went to 30 different states to research this thing. I went to Newfoundland for 2 weeks. I don't know if everyone knows Robert Caro, like I try to turn over every page. And I found stuff that no one else had found because they kind of limit their research to what they think is the definitive archive. 2 of them, one of them is at Purdue University, where George Putnam gave a lot of papers after Amelia died, and she was not kidnapped, so I will say died in 1937. And also, a lot of the stuff is in Boston as well, at Harvard University. I know that some of Mindy, one of my relatives here, was with me when I was doing research at Boston. It's in Radcliffe, and that is because Muriel Earhart, who was Amelia's sister, gave a lot of her material to Radcliffe. I'm actually going to be doing another presentation at Medford Library in March, because that's where Amelia Earhart lived when she was a Boston social worker. We can talk about why she was all over the country, but it's really good for book sales when you can say this. She lived here, she lived there. I'm going to Chicago soon because she went to high school in Chicago. Going to Los Angeles. I just got invited to Los Angeles because she lived in Los Angeles, and Miami Book Fair because she left from Miami. But the thing that's really interesting is also, and you know this, Eric, that you can't go by biographies because biographies lie as well. They just cover the story. I can tell when mistakes are being repeated by the next biography. You always have to go back to the original sources. But what's crazy about the Amelia Earhart story, this is where it gets really complicated. The papers, the original papers, are all lies because George Putnam is behind them. So you have to her books are ghostwritten, her articles are ghostwritten. This was one of George's triumphs. This is how he was able to get books out really fast. He would hire ghostwriters. And so what I have to do is what I know you like to call, and we like to call it, and Dave Kindy is here from the Washington, who did that wonderful piece of the Washington Post. We triangulate the truth. You have to check who is telling you the story. What do they have to gain? Even Muriel Earhart, who fought back, her last name was Morrissey when she was in Boston, she fought back on the conspiracy nonsense that is all over American story of Amelia Earhart. We could talk about how that happened. But She also is not to be trusted.
Even her sister?
Even her sister, because I interviewed her daughter, who just passed away, the last living person to know Amelia Earhart. I went to Vermont to interview her in her home. I saw the family Bible, which is the picture in my book of when Amelia Earhart dies, which is pretty much July 3rd, 1937. Like, no one in the family thinks that anything other than that she ran out of gas, so that's a spoiler. But
Spoiler, Amelia Earhart died.
Right, exactly. No, but people that think that she came back. I mean, I've had conversations with people that think that she came back with the first face transplant. I'm like, come on. But the thing that is amazing to me is that her daughter said, my mother did not like anything unseemly said about her sister. And she would just, tamp down the story. So things like Amelia Earhart had a sugar daddy in the jazz age. That goes out. But how do I know this? She's talking on the tapes that I eventually found. And she's whispering in a low voice and fuzzy. And I've mentioned this in a couple of interviews, but my husband has a small recording studio, and he came in very handy because he defuzzed it, and then he amplified audio, and all of a sudden I could say, she wanted to marry him, and it's our sister talking. So this is not just conjecture. So there's a lot of really interesting ways that you can get at the truth.
I love it that you caught the whispers thanks to your husband's ability to clean up some old tape. It's amazing.
Well, let me tell you about the tapes, because this
Sure.
was a chase of my whole book. My first hit was at the University of New Hampshire. See, the thing about Purdue collection, which is pretty extensive, is that anything that's not flattering to Putnam is not going to be there. It was given by Putnam when he was on to his third wife, who was about 23 years old. That's in the book. But she did not want to live with a ghost. There was a big painting of Amelia Earhart in the house. He's like, get rid of everything. So everything went to Purdue. So in the Harvard collection, the Radcliffe, there's actually a date lock on some of the papers there. You can't even, I actually have some of the papers that I'm not supposed to have, but I can't say how I have them. But you can't even look at some of the stuff that was said. But here's something that people are going to be shocked about. So one of the great stories is that Amelia Earhart and her sister, Muriel, her first name was originally Grace Muriel, were very close during the period that she was flying, and this is absolutely untrue. They were they were good friends when they lived in Kansas, but imagine one sibling becomes super famous, and one sibling is a housewife in Medford, and with an abusive husband who won't give her money in the Great Depression. And there's a lot of jealousy. And Amelia Earhart George Putnam never met Muriel the entire time that Amelia was with him. And they were married in 1931, and she disappears in 1937. So she never met her husband. And what happens is that George Putnam meets Muriel because he sold a book called World Flight. That part of that last trip was about making money for their retirement. And he spent the money, and so they have to deliver a book when she disappears. And he wants Muriel's stories of childhood to fill in this book. And her husband is not giving her any money, and he reaches out to her, and she starts to fill in a lot of the stories that we know about Amelia Earhart, like she built a roller coaster and all that stuff that comes from Muriel. But she meets George Putnam for the first time after Amelia Earhart's death. So that's really interesting. And now, we all have sibling issues, and sometimes we get back together, sometimes we don't get back together, but that was really interesting to me. Like, that is what telling the truth looks like. That doesn't make Amelia Earhart less brave.
I have a question based on that. I want to read a sentence from your intro.
Sure.
In striving to illuminate who Amelia Earhart really was, I found myself not only a researcher, but also something of an avenger. It was astonishing how much time and effort I spent just debunking Earhart lore that had been repeated for generations. So what is the biggest piece of Earhart lore that everybody thinks they know about Amelia Earhart, that the biographers repeated, and that you debunked?
Well, The first thing you're going to hear is there's often a story that Amelia Earhart, I mean, even NBC News this week has is this Amelia Earhart in this lagoon, is this her plane? No, it's not.
Oh, this is about her death.
Right.
But what about her life? What's the biggest debunks?
The biggest debunk is that the main thing, two things. One is that she is a very kind person. And I know this because I listened to 200 hours of tapes of people that knew her that I found at the end of my journey. People talking, her stepchildren, her friends, her rivals, everyone is saying what a kind person she was. After 200 hours of tapes, I didn't hear anything nice about George Putnam, which is kind of interesting. But what's interesting is that she knew who he was when she married him. This is not hidden from her. And that is a show of ambition. Now you think back to the fact that she's trying to marry a 68-year-old when she was 21 to get ahead. And also that she's very, very reckless. I mean, the flight that leaves from Boston, there is a man who is the pilot named Wilmer Stoltz. He's an alcoholic. Her father was an alcoholic. And, we have Tom Perrotta.
At 6.
No. I looked on the website, it said 7.
No, 6. Yeah, 6 to 7.
That's exciting. This is Eric Turkey.
I've been filling in, but please have it.
Very sorry.
No problem. Julia says hello. She was trying to reach you.
The end of your debunking story, but I'm also going to hand the mic over to Tom to ask the next question.
Okay, so we were just talking about what the most shocking revelation I had was just how incredibly, first of all, she's an incredible feminist. She's militantly feminist. So Putnam gets a hold of her and says, you got to tone that down right now. She is also ambitious as hell. I was going to say AF. And that's toned down. But also she's not the world's best flyer. She's very bad at navigation. And that is something that is a myth, that she's this terrific flyer. What she is a brave, determined flyer who wants women to be able to take the same risks that men can take. Why should women not be able to risk their lives? Now, a lot of other women pilots would say you're out of your mind. You got to train. She would take really great risks. And in Boston, as I was saying, she got in a plane with a man who's an alcoholic who was drunk when it took off, when they landed in 1928. And she was a passenger. She and Putnam are very, very reckless from the very, very get-go. And that's part of the story that you try to lace through the book, is that it's not so shocking that she disappears. It's not this great mystery. As I said, it's a tragedy foretold. And hello.
Hello. I was so proud of myself for getting here 15 minutes before.
One of my favorite authors is Tom Perrotta, as he knows. I've known him since, 1998?
That is correct. Well, I don't know what you guys have been discussing, but the personal question I had for you was, when I met you in 1998, you were a talented young comic novelist.
Right.
And now you are a serious historian and biographer, and I just wondered what that journey was that got you here.
Well, I think that's a great question. I think that's one of the reasons I'm able to write in the genre, which a lot of people call narrative nonfiction. I'm a storyteller at my heart. I actually have some comedy that slips in the book here and there, but I also am a documentary director, and that was I was toggling back and forth, and I learned a lot of the skills of narrative nonfiction from working on fiction. One of the things the difference between a book that's narrative nonfiction and, say, a straight soup to nuts biography is that there's a story. And for me, the story begins when Amelia Earhart is in the same office as George Putnam, and he's a married man, and he's absolutely wanting to be with her. To me, that's the beginning of the story. What you're able to do with narrative nonfiction is also use dialogue. And Tom is a master of dialogue, but I'm a good ER, And you can't make up dialogue in narrative nonfiction, but you can source it. So you could get it from interviews, you can get it from radio clips, you can put that in. And that's some of the skills that I got from making documentaries. And the other thing that I am able to do in narrative nonfiction are using more tools. I mean, one of the greatest compliments to me is when it's called novelistic, right? That sells books, by the way. It's a story. But I'm not making up my story, but what a lot of people don't do in a biography is they just say, this happened, this happened. You want a sense of place, right? So you want to go, so I don't just sit and Google and go to archive. I go to the places, just as I would do with my novels or with my documentaries. I went to New Guinea, and I went to Antarctica for my last book, but I went to Newfoundland for 2 weeks, and Newfoundland it's a bit of a cheat, but it was the shortest place to go across the Atlantic, so that's why everybody wanted to fly from there. And they have incredible archives, but one of the things that I did when I went to Newfoundland is I went to Trepassé, which is where she was holed up for 2 weeks and fogged in, and and there was a rival, the Queen of Diamonds, Mabel Bold. And I went there, and I don't even know what I'm going to find, but I start to get how does it smell? What does the fog feel like? But then I met the descendants of the people that hosted her, and I'm able to look at scrapbooks that no one else has ever looked at of Amelia Earhart arriving in Newfoundland. So it's really important to get off your couch, but to also you're basically casting a narrative nonfiction book. I mean, it's a long book, but it was much longer. And you just start to eliminate. I mean, as you know, in novel writing, you can't have too many characters.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the comedy before, and I kept thinking as I read this book, especially one section. It's the section after she's gone across the Atlantic as a passenger, but is not really a great flyer.
Right.
But she's got that reputation somehow, and she just keeps getting into accidents and near misses in public places. She has people flying in her stead.
Right.
It almost seems like a dark comedy.
It actually is, and actually one of my, I don't know, there's a couple of comic lines that I'm just going to throw out that I like. One of the things that's amazing is she's asked to be the aviation editor, the associate, of Cosmopolitan magazine, and she can't write that well. She could do poetry, but I have the files of the ghostwriters that were, it's not like I'm just stating this. I'm, looking at archives, but you try to put that in a way that's a narrative. But at the same time, Cosmopolitan hired Amelia Earhart to up their circulation. They also hired Mussolini to write about women. And he did some of the most misogynistic columns, but he was a pretty good writer. So I put in a line, and I wanted to see if anyone would see it. And I said, Amelia Earhart was the better person, but Mussolini was the better writer. And I got about 3 people that saw that line, so that made me laugh for 5 minutes. So there's a couple of lines like that. But it's really about, to me, I'm 59 years old. I'm Gen X. And I feel like I've used all parts of myself, if that makes any sense. The writing is one of the few professions where you're not over. If you're, whenever you're writing, you've got to use your past. I'm able to do dialogue. I'm able to have that sense of plot, and that's something that I don't see in a lot of nonfiction books is plot, and it's really important. And plot is less important in an article, and knowing the difference between an article and a book. How are you going to get through this whole book? And one of my favorite pieces of advice came from Daniel Zalewski, who's the features editor at The New Yorker. He said, people come to The New Yorker, and this book was excerpted there, they just try to reinvent the wheel. All I want you to do is just tell me the story. Just tell me the story. And chronology is your friend. So there's a tremendous, my Stowaway was about someone who very little was known this is the opposite problem. I could have just been researching for the next 20 years. There's so much about Amelia Earhart. But it's, when I was trying to keep track of it, I had a giant timeline. And I would say, okay, when did this happen? When did this happen? And I just told the story in real time. And also you start to see, wait, this, now I understand why she's there. You know, now I understand why she's there. This is actually, you know, this is actually sets it up. Everything sort of racks into focus when you put it in real time. Now, not to say that there aren't books that are not in chronological order that are great, but when you're telling narrative nonfiction, it's the simplest way, and for many editors, it's the best way. Just tell the story.
You know, and I think you did tell a story, at least for me, which did have to do. You know, I heard you talking about it as I walked in, this idea of like, is she a hero? Are you debunking her? And in a funny way, I think you're doing both. Because I think early on, I get this feeling of somebody who's been puffed up into something she's not. And then the real internal drama seems to be that she wants to live up to this idea of who the public has been told she is. And it's ultimately a tragedy.
Right, and the thing is also she's incredibly brave. And as I was saying, I don't know if it was before you came in, what really differentiates Amelia Earhart to me from the other pilots is that she's really pushing women forward. We don't think about the early astronauts who there was a very good chance that they would die every time they took off. We don't say, why did you do it? How did you do it? And she wanted women to be able to take the same risks that men could take without anyone saying, you know, why did you do it? She was a stepmother, which is in this book. She marries Putnam, and she does help raise these two kids. We don't think of Amelia Earhart as a mother, but she chose not to have children so that she wouldn't have that over her head. But there were other women that were taking safety measures that Amelia Earhart wasn't taking. So there's a recklessness, but there's also this desire to say, why can't I do it? Do we actually question those early flight pioneers that were men for taking the risks? No, we don't. We just say they're so brave. And she wanted that option for women. There is an organization, I'm going to be speaking on Saturday in front of the 99s, which is the first organization of 99 women pilots. Amelia Earhart was the first president. There's now thousands of women pilots that are members, including astronauts. And you know what's so fascinating about that is that she was a great organizer. She really pushed women forward. I think that if she had lived, she would have actually entered the space industry, and she would have been pushing women forward. Now, there is something really amazing about Amelia Earhart that I found in the archives. Archives can be in the craziest places. One of the places that I found good stuff was in the Eisenhower Library, because Jackie Cochran, who was one of the great women pilots of the 20th century, was a big Eisenhower supporter and put her papers there. In there is a document of material by Stuart Stern. Do you know the name of Stuart Stern?
I do not.
Stuart Stern was one of the great screenwriters. I'm looking at Tom because he's also involved with screenplays. And he wrote a little movie called Rebel Without a Cause. And he wrote a lot of really great American movies, and he won an Oscar. And he recently passed away. And his papers, there was a document in the Eisenhower Library, and also I just went through the University of Iowa archives. No one knew that there was Amelia Earhart stuff. I guessed it, because I was like, where are his papers? He desperately wanted to make a film about Amelia Earhart after Rebel Without a Cause. And he interviewed a number of people that were alive, including in Boston. He was coming very often to Boston, to Medford, to interview Muriel Narcy, Amelia's sister. But he also was interviewing George Putnam, married 4 times. He had the wife. And he came to the same, he puts his film outline in the papers in Iowa. This is, I found this at the end of my journey. And I'm thinking, this is one of the great American screenwriters. What is he coming up with? Did he come up with a different story? And his story is about how much of a monster George Putnam is, and that you can't tell a story. He came to the conclusion that that's the interesting story, but you can't tell it when these people are alive. it's just not going to work. And he knows the movie. He sees it. The whole outline for this film is there. And he just said, I can't, Muriel is not going to want Amelia Earhart to be anything but perfect. And the fourth wife, who was, with Putnam at the end, is not going to want this part of the legacy out there. And I was very actually touched that I could see this, but in the Eisenhower Library are some of the Stuart Stern papers, and Jackie Cochran and Floyd Oldham are talking about how George Putnam helped plant, even though he believed that she ran out of gas, helped plant conspiracy theories to raise money for a movie. And Floyd Oldham, who's Jackie Cochran's husband, was the wealthiest man during the Great Depression and the head of a film studio as well. And he's confirming this, that George would deny it, but they were slipping him money. So he helps set up the conspiracy theory for his own wife to line his pockets. I mean, that's not great. But that's interesting, right? Which story do you want? Do you want the Blanche story, or do you want a nuanced, complicated story? But the crazy thing is, I have interviewed women going to the moon. I have interviewed several of the women astronauts, including Jessica Meyer. I could put Rosh Hashanah, Happy Rosh Hashanah, everybody, she's a Jewish astronaut. But her hero is Amelia Earhart. Many of the astronauts and many women pilots, their hero is Amelia Earhart. You do not get women going to the moon without George Putnam. Amelia Earhart was never going to inspire women in aviation. She had been a pilot, but she was climbing as a social worker in Boston, and that was there was very little avenue for a woman pilot, and social work was the way up. If you know Frances Perkins is, and her role in the FDR administration, and that was the role model. And she actually was on the board at Boston at the social works house that she was here. She had been the flying social worker, and that's how she was heard about. But she was a hobby pilot. Her years of flying were basically behind her, and it was fun for her. And she saw social work as the way forward to make her mark. So you have to remember that history is complicated, and we want Amelia Earhart to have forged her own path. But she didn't. It's the two of them together that forged her path. And as you know, when you're writing about any story, you also have decades that are almost characters. And the beginning of this book is the Jazz Age, and everything's going on. I mean, George Putnam, I said, is having an affair, but so is his wife. She's having her own affair. Anything goes, right? The 1930s, the relationship changes because Amelia Earhart becomes George Putnam's meal ticket, but Amelia Earhart can't keep her flying without George Putnam. And it's very much a partnership at that point, even though it is beginning a very sexual relationship when they begin the relationship.
I mean, I can actually sympathize with Stuart Stearns. I did feel like there was a case to be made where Amelia Earhart is sort of a feminist victim. That, she falls under the spell of this guy who creates a myth about her and keeps pushing her for financial reasons, who knows what, interpersonal reasons, and ultimately sends her off with a drunk navigator to do something that everybody around her said you shouldn't do.
Well, that's the thing that's really interesting to me, because people have asked me if I blame George Putnam for Amelia Earhart's death, and I know I blame Amelia Earhart and George Putnam for Amelia Earhart's death, because Amelia Earhart knew what she didn't know. And she knew who she was marrying. She was engaged. My friend Kathy's here from Marblehead. We went around Marblehead looking at her fiance, Sam Chapman's, any traces of Sam Chapman, including we went to the cemetery. I recently found out that he died around the same time as George Putnam, around 1950. I recently found out after my book came out that he committed suicide. Here's the thing, we don't know why. like I heard somebody telling a story that it was because he was always in love with Amelia Earhart. We don't know that. You know, he could have been sick. We don't know. You can't make up what you want the story to be. But, you know, it's very much, she was going to marry him, and Putnam would, I mean, I'm talking in 2025, but he was I'm going to just say it. I mean, this is not in my book, but he's a malignant narcissist. He's a love bomber. There's 4 relationships that he's in. He love bombs every single one of them. And one of the ways I can tell that is I was able to get the divorce records for the third wife, you know, in a closed room in Maine. If I tell you where, I have to shoot you. But I was looking through like things that he was doing, you know, and like, I mean, like it was a pattern that is very clearly repeated. But I think he was really in love with Amelia Earhart when he was in love with her. But he moved on very quickly. He was, I mean, like, it's very hard to judge anyone when they lose a partner, whatever you need. But he was dating someone a stunt woman within about 7 weeks of her disappearance.
A stunt woman, that's kind of amazing. You know, it does though fit into, like we can think of a bunch of relationships like this, of the older man who is kind of directing the thing, and the younger woman who's the talent. You can imagine like a Sonny and Cher, you can imagine Ike and Tina. I'm sure there are a lot more, and I think the hope is always that this younger woman will at some point snap out of it, kind of. And if maybe she would have.
Well, you know, I think the thing that you need to know is, so the flight where she disappears in 1937 is not one flight. It's a very casual flight around the equator. She had gone the other way, and the plane had cracked up, or actually ground looped, which means it wasn't up in the air, it was on the ground when it sort of belly flopped. And they were really broke. This is really the height of the Depression. Her 1932 flight, where she flies across the Atlantic, is really for pushing women forward. 1928, she's a passenger, she's really upset. This 1937 flight was a retirement plan. They had a $1 million film deal with Bernard Baruch, who was the other wealthy man besides Floyd Oldham. It was an NBC deal. They had a book deal. Quaker Oats had a deal with them. They were going to make the equivalent of $3 to $4 million in modern times, and that was going to be the end of her stunt flight. She almost made it. But that first flight, she had a navigator on there named Harry Manning, who knew Morse code. And when he was on that first flight, you could see how poorly she navigated the Electra 10A. He's like, I'm out. I don't want to be on this flight. So they're so broke that Putnam gets Fred Noonan, who's a fantastic navigator. He's what we call a celestial navigator, you know, using the skies, and he was with Pan Am. But the navigators on Pan Am, when they're doing some of those first flights of the Pacific, they're not doing the navigation as a navigator. He's you know, I mean, they're not doing the Morse code. And so neither Amelia Earhart nor Fred Noonan learned Morse code. And Harry Manning begged them, you know, if you're going to fly again, learn Morse code. They both knew about 10 words. But they're also making judgments like leaving equipment behind. And it's kind of terrifying when you're reading around like what they're doing. But the thing that's amazing to me is that despite that, they almost made it. She disappears near Howland Island, which is right in the middle of the Pacific. It's basically the size of Central Park. Up in the sky, it's very easy to miss. And the plane was packed with gas. And if you miss the plane, you have to fly around. There's no gas. I mean, so this is what her friends like Louise Thaden, who was another great woman pilot. Probably, you know, I would say the 3 greats were Eleanor Smith, Jackie Cochran, and Louise Thaden. Louise Thaden is saying, it's a suicide mission. Why are you even doing this flight? You have a career, you have track record, you don't, and she's like, I'm doing it for George, he's so loyal. But she thinks that she should wait until you get Howland Island done first. and George Putnam is saying, we have a book deal, and as you know, in the book deal, a big book often comes out in September. Why does it come out in September or October? Because you want it to be something that they buy for Christmas. And he's like, if we're going to put out a book, you have to do this flight now. So she's basically doing the hardest flight at the end of her trip. And Louise Thaden is, no one's listened to these tapes except for me, is saying he was begging, basically saying you have to go now. And also Louise Thaden, who's not like Eleanor Smith, one of her rivals, is her best friend, and saying she's really not that great a pilot. I loved her. She's a good pilot, but she's not a great pilot, and she's a terrible navigator. And I don't know why she did it. And these archives just add so much to the story, because you start to think of, I don't know how many people know the word Meshuggah, but what is Amelia Earhart thinking? And this is what Louise Thaden says: if you're going to take a flight like that, you have to be something of a fatalist. If you're going to be involved with that, and at a certain point, there is a lot of pilots have told me that many airplane accidents come from something called what is it, Dave? Do you know what it is?
It's complacency, really. Is
right,
what
but it's get homeitis.
Right.
Get homeitis. She's basically 3 days from coming back. She's going to be on NBC. She's going to be the guest on radio. Her husband's sending messages to the cutter, the Coast Guard cutter, saying, "Have a race home." But here's the thing: Amelia Earhart, at the very end, it has dysentery. She's very sick. Fred Noonan, who came cheap, who promised not to drink, is drinking up a storm. Now, I don't think he's drunk when he gets on that plane, but she's furious at him. They're not getting along. And one of the things that's amazing is that she begs someone, and this is all on the archives that I found, she begs a guy who knows Morse code and radio operations named Harry Balfour to come on the last leg of the flight. And the Australian head of that regional airport in Lae, New Guinea, which was a gold mining area, says, we can't let go of this guy. He's the one that knows Morse code. He's the one that knows the radio operations. So she gets on that plane knowing that she doesn't know Morse code. So that's why I say it's not just George Putnam, it's Amelia Earhart as well. And she's basically, all of her flights that she took, and she did some sensational flights, were all incredibly risky, and she almost died on all of them. So it's all great if you make it. I think of Evel Knievel, right? It's all fantastic until all of that lack of preparation catches up with you.
One thing I think I don't want to say, it's easy to be a grandstander, but it is, a lot of people saw the folly and told her. And I guess the problem was she didn't have a partner who was looking out. Somebody has to be the one to put the brakes on, right?
Right. Well, the thing is that, there's all this, that's the thing that's really fascinating, is now the story changes, because who gets to tell the story, right? So after she passes away, and she does die in July of 1937, now we have a situation where, how are we going to shape that narrative? And as you know, who tells the story? So George Putnam leaps in to start telling the story, how he dissuaded her, and I don't want you to fly. And, it's really important to look at, why would somebody have to tell that story? And I think what really is moving to me is that she did have a loyalty to him, because she felt they were not getting along that last, Jackie Cochran is a witness to that. But she did feel that she owed him something, because he had made her famous. He had given her a lifestyle that she had once only imagined. Do you want to have some questions from the audience? Would that be lovely? Does anyone have a question? And how are we with Jeff with time?
You're good.
Okay, does anyone have and also Tom, if you have a question about Tom.
No.
He's one of my favorites. So.
I think he has a new book coming out.
Not until April, but
Oh, what is your book? What is your book?
it's called Ghost Town.
And what is it? Is it a new novel coming out?
Yeah, it's a ghost story set in 1974.
You gotta talk it to the
It's a
mic.
ghost story set in 1974.
Oh wow, that's a big. Whatever there's a Tom. Tom knows. I'm like a nerd. I'm like always first in line, right?
The question I had was, and I can't remember, did they know that the charts that they had were inaccurate at the time? I know Howland Island, they have since found out that the charts that they had was not correct, they were like off by like 5 miles or something.
You know, there's a lot of back and forth in this. They probably didn't know, but even in this particular area, there's like all these there's a whole industry of people trying to find Amelia Earhart's plane. It's a whole cottage industry, and people are like claiming credit. Like I figured that out. No, I figured that out. But the charts were
I know
probably
where it
about.
is, it's at the bottom of the ocean.
Yeah. No, I mean, yes. This is what's so fascinating about Amelia Earhart's plane is that there are people that are legitimately searching for her, but they don't actually put out information that they found stuff before they found it. So like if you ever see things like, I found a freckle bottle, freckle, I mean like, oops, it wasn't the freckle, I mean it's fundraising. We're getting you to pay for expeditions. But there are people that are doing legitimate science. And some of the teams, one of them is called Nauticus, and they have never said that they found the plane. But what they have done is eliminated where she isn't over the years, and where someone is not is actually really important information. But what I understand, from my understanding, is that if the plane, which I think it is about 11 to 24 miles northwest of Howland Island in the deep, 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 deep Pacific Ocean, very different than the Atlantic Ocean, there would be no gas that exploded. The plane is either going to be by itself or it's going to be in two pieces. And the thing that would be really interesting is what survives. Now, if you're thinking there's going to be skeletons there, that's going to have dissolved. That's not going to be there. But has anyone a Titanic fan? I mean, papers survived. You can read newspapers. Buttons survived. Shoes survived. So Fred Noonan and Amelia Earhart were communicating by a jerry-rigged fishing pole, a bamboo fishing pole, because it was so noisy. There might be notes that would be on there. There might be mechanical paperwork that's in and that could last. But I think the one thing that's really interesting is, say they do find the plane, who does it belong to? Does it belong to Purdue University? Does it belong to the Smithsonian? But people have been saying they found the plane. I mean, one of the things that I do as a journalist is I sometimes look very innocent. And I just sidle over to someone in conversation. And I was talking to someone, remember the whole thing about the plane was found, and they think they found Amelia Earhart's plane. And I told the Wall Street Journal, I think that's a log, but they took that out. Because the way that a lot of newspapers craft it to get away with it is has Amelia Earhart's plane been found? So then they're not saying that it's found. But I asked questions, and I found out that one of the team members believed that he had a sign from above that he was the one to find Amelia Earhart. Now, that's the information that I can get in 5 seconds. And anyone who's related to me knows that I come from a scientific family. And I'm like, yeah, no. And so later on, a year later, it turned out that it was a log. But I had been told by the rival teams that I trust, I know all these guys, that they love it when a rival team is in the news because it helps with their fundraising. So anytime Amelia Earhart gets in the plane, but I would say the mystery of Amelia Earhart to me is not how she died, but how she lived. And that was how I sold my book. And I don't think it's much of a mystery. I think she ran out of gas. Peter.
The movie deal.
All right. Well, I have to be really careful. This is being live streamed. There is a in process. I can tell you after the live stream.
What part are you playing?
Executive producer. But I do feel that one of the things, I'm also a documentary director, I've won the Spirit Award. I've done, I bring that expertise. Even there was a New York Times article this week. I don't know how many people saw it. It was the cover of the real estate section of like how basically it was my idea that Amelia Earhart story is not a Midwestern story. It's a New York story in the lap of spin. And it was the buildings that are left behind that tell the story. But even there, I love the writer who does Streetscapes, which is a great column, but I was like, you can't get the Amelia Earhart stuff wrong because they're going to come for you. You have to have the receipts. So I picked the buildings with him. I walked to the buildings with him. I gave him all my archives. When the Times wanted to check, how do you know there was an argument in Greenwich House where she was being stashed as his mistress? Well, it's because I was in the University of New Hampshire, and there's notes that didn't go into books, handwritten notes from interviews about them screaming about, her mother screaming like, I don't want you to marry him, he's a married man. Like I can give you backup as someone, as a filmmaker, I can also envision a film like the audio elements. As I said, there are 200 hours of tapes. Those are great elements to be seen, that can be heard. There's a saying in documentaries that it's the picture is less important than the sound. Like as long as you can hear it, it can be very fuzzy and you can get a lot out of it, but it can't. If the audio is bad, you're screwed. Yes.
I'm fascinated by all the research that you've done and all the places you've gone, and like UNH and all different locations across the country and the world. Would you consider writing a book about it or doing a documentary about all that you found and the hidden places? And
Well, what's really funny is that I'm doing a lot of this book came out in July. I've done 15 spots. I'm doing 25 more. I just found out, I can say this, that I'm going to do a 30-minute special with C-SPAN Book Talk, and we'll talk about it. And I'm also going to be doing a pretty cool event with David Rubenstein. I don't know if you know David Rubenstein, who's a billionaire, but he's also a good billionaire who gives money to the arts. And he's going to launch the New York Historical Society series in January, which is often, with like Bill Clinton or Barack Obama, whatever. But I'm actually the first guest, and they're going to be doing a 1-hour special for PBS. Mm-hmm. So I'm able to keep going, but at a certain point, like Tom, you get involved with projects. I was told by other Amelia Earhart biographers that you're going to be an Amelia Earhart expert now for the rest of your life. But I've started to do research on my next book. I continue to do articles. I'm a journalist as well. I'm a professor at NYU. I'm the features professor there. And that's really rewarding to me, is teaching students how to get the truth. I'm terrified when someone comes into my class and they believe in astrology and tarot, and they're like, it's true. I'm like, no, you can't be a journalist. You gotta get out of my class. And this is the part of the culture now. To be able to have critical thinking is a skill that many people don't have right now. I have a friend here from Stuyvesant High School, Peter Lefkowitz, who he knows that we were taught at a very early age that we have to have evidence-based thinking, and literally many stories that we take for granted as truth is not truth. And I'm really excited to be continuing to work with Viking Books, and we've been talking about another big name who I can tell the truth about.
thank you.
Any other questions? Jeff, do you have a question?
Well, yeah, I did want to ask you a little bit more about the C-SPAN. When is that going to be again?
Well, this is really fun. This is going to be at the Miami Book Fair. Have you done the Miami Book Fair?
I have not.
I heard it's a real party town.
It's a great festival.
That's what they say.
But this is where all the rock stars they literally have a rock band of all the big. I don't think I've been invited to the rock band, but C-SPAN is going to be at the Miami Book Fair, and I just got asked to do a one-on-one with them for half an hour. And, you know, part of the reason that I'm being asked to do this stuff is because part of the job of an author is pushing the book out. And a lot of people don't see that as part of your job, and it's a very difficult part. What do you think about that, Tom? I mean, you have many more years of experience than me on this.
Well, I'm amazed that you're going to do 25 more. It can be a little bit grueling. I mean, it involves travel. You know, it involves, I think, sometimes saying the same things over and over again, and you have to kind of figure out how do I keep making this interesting for me, because if it's not interesting for me, it's probably less interesting for an audience. I think you're right about becoming a lifelong expert. I just got asked this week to write an op-ed about the rapture, and I had written The Leftovers, you know, like, I don't know, 15 years ago now, and I just told them, I have a lot of thoughts about it. They're tucked somewhere deep in my mind. I just didn't feel like, you know, I feel like I've moved on, you know, even if the culture keeps kind of returning.
Right.
But, you know, that, you know, a generation before us, or two generations, somebody like John Updike did not go out on the road and try to hand sell his books. Mm-hmm. Philip Roth didn't do much of that. You know, I think there was a feeling of like, I am a writer, I sit home in my room and I write, and I have a publisher. And the publisher's job is to get that book into the hands of readers. And in the course of our writing life, you know, the public presence of the writer, it's kind of an interesting thing, you know, because so many other mass media events are far away. Like, it's very hard to meet your favorite rock star. It's kind of hard to meet your favorite actor. But it's not very hard to meet your favorite
I've
writer.
met Kurt Vonnegut and Norman Mailer, and I just went to their readings, you know?
It's kind of an amazing thing.
So I would just say, one thing that's really exciting though is that it's a great way to see America, you know, to be on tour and meeting people and going out of your comfort zone. I'm going to be, as I said, in Miami. I'm going to Chicago, Texas. I'm doing Waco, Texas. I'm like, I've never been to Waco, Texas. I'm going to Montana. I'm in California. And the one thing that's also great is the audiobook was recorded by, how many people know Stephanie Powers in Heart to Heart? Mm-hmm. And that came about because of social media. One of my friends on social media said, hey, I kind of know Stephanie Powers, and did you know she's a pilot? And she was also the girl from Uncle. That's how long she's been around. And she loved it. She's like, Amelia Earhart's my hero. And so she did it, and I'm not sure, but I might be flying around California with Stephanie Powers. So it's like just Tom, I know that this is difficult because you're actually such a much bigger, popular writer than me. But my basic philosophy is to say yes to things, not just because I want to get the book out, because opportunities arise. And if you're a journalist as well, you want to have access to stories. I did a piece, I will tell you a really funny thing, and maybe this should be the last thing. I was trying to get access to those tapes. I heard about those tapes early on. I couldn't get to them. So I started to write, I wouldn't call them fake articles, but I started to write articles to get closer to sources, just to be able to be in the same room and maybe they would trust me. So I did a big article, sort of a puffy piece, for the Daily Beast about Amelia Earhart's statue being put into Capitol Hill. There's 2 statues for every state. And I was hoping that during the pandemic, when it was very difficult to get to the Earharts, I'd met a lot of the Putnams, but how do you get to the Earharts? They're all over the place, you know. I figured a statue would bring them all out, you know, like on Capitol Hill. And there was a party. Everybody loves Amelia Earhart. So they had a big event. They're bringing the statue in. Mitch McConnell's talking. Nancy Pelosi's talking. And then there's Kansas throws a party. in Capitol Hill, I go into the room, and there's all the Democrats and all the Republicans, and they're all smiling and patting each other on the back, and I just realized, what's going on here? And there's Mitch McConnell, and there's Nancy Pelosi, and everyone is using Amelia Earhart the way they need to use Amelia Earhart. And I've written about Pocahontas as well, about how they recreated at Colonial Williamsburg a wedding 400 years later, and the tribe who I interviewed wanted the casino rights, and Colonial Williamsburg wanted attendance. So people are using Amelia Earhart the way they need her to be, including who they want her to be. And that's what's so interesting, that she's a blank slate. I've had women tell me, of course you know what her sexuality is, and I don't really care. I'm from New York, whatever you do privately, I don't care. But I'm only going to tell you what I was able to find out. And so even the fact that somebody wants her to be secretly lesbian, which if that came out, I'd be great. You found evidence. But I'm not going to say that's true if I don't find evidence of that. And it's really important that its legacy is also something that you're fighting against. A lot of people, Amelia Earhart is an icon to so many people for so many different reasons.
Wonderful. And we will.
I don't know if anyone wants to have a book sign, and also Tom. Some of Tom's books are here.
We have a number of Tom's books, including Mrs. Fletcher and Tracy Flick, Election. There's a number of his books here. And he was just at the regional book conference and with the ARCs, the advanced review copies of the new book. And the new book is fantastic. So, and you can pre-order from our website, FYI, there. And anybody that's watching this recording later, the recording of this event, we'll have signed copies available of the book, of the Aviator and the Showman available for you as well.
Soon to be a documentary, and then hopefully people.
Yay.
Can't tell you who.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Julia Glass says hello, Tom.